It was supposed to be a routine mission, a simple reconnaissance job on a planet in the outer sector. We were part of a small team of soldiers, assigned to observe and report any unusual activity. No one expected anything out of the ordinary, but the moment we landed, things went terribly wrong. The planet was eerily quiet, like a place long abandoned. The terrain was rugged, with thick forests and tall, jagged mountains in the distance. The air had a strange, metallic smell, but nothing to raise alarm. Our sensors showed little to no sign of life, except for the occasional blip indicating low-level movements, which we assumed were wildlife. We set up camp near the outskirts of a dense forest and began our surveillance. Hours passed without incident, until we noticed something odd on the edge of the woods. At first, it was just a shadow, barely visible in the low light of the late evening. Then it moved. It wasn't the way an animal would move, more like a person, but it was much too fast, its body shifting in ways that didn't seem natural. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was off. I signaled to the rest of the team to remain alert, but I knew in my gut that we weren't dealing with just another local creature. We set up a perimeter and began to approach the moving figure cautiously. As we drew closer, the silhouette became clear. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely alien either. Its skin was a dull gray, and its face, though vaguely human, was twisted in a way that made it hard to focus on. It looked like it had been through something, like it had survived something terrible. Yet it was still standing. I wanted to turn back, but we were already too close. We called out to it, but the creature just kept moving, as if it hadn't heard us at all. It was still coming straight toward us, unfazed by our presence. My heart raced as the team fell into position, rifles raised, ready for anything. One of my comrades, Lt. Barnes, shouted a warning and fired a single shot. It was a clean shot. We were trained for this, and there was no way it could miss. The bullet hit its target with a sickening thud. The creature paused, and for a split second, I thought we had done it. I thought we had stopped it. But then, it did something I couldn't believe. It didn't fall. It didn't even stagger. The creature simply let out a loud, guttural laugh. It wasn't a laugh of pain, but of mockery, as if it knew something we didn't. I watched, frozen in shock, as the creature took another step forward. Unheard, the bullet had done nothing to slow it down. The sound of its laugh echoed through the forest, almost as if it was daring us to try again. I wasn't sure what to do. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were supposed to be in control. We were supposed to be the ones who survived. But this thing, whatever it was, seemed to be beyond anything we had ever encountered. My mind raced, running through every possible scenario, but nothing seemed to make sense. Why wasn't it stopping? Why wasn't it even reacting to our attack? Lt. Barnes fired again. This time, it was multiple shots. The creature was closer now, almost within range of our perimeter. But again, it did the same thing. It laughed. It didn't dodge the bullets. It didn't even flinch. It just kept coming, step by step, with no sign of slowing down. Panic began to set in. My team had never faced anything like this. We were used to hostile creatures, to things that could be killed, subdued, or driven away. But this was something different, something we couldn't understand. I ordered the team to retreat, but the creature was relentless. No matter how fast we ran, it was always just behind us, as if it was following us with some sort of unholy determination. As we stumbled through the forest, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. The creature's eyes were glowing faintly, like twin stars in the night. But there was something else, something more unsettling. The creature didn't look angry. It didn't look like it was trying to hunt us. It was almost as if it was amused by the fact that we thought we could stop it. It wasn't until we reached the edge of the forest, out of breath and covered in dirt, that the creature stopped. It stood there, watching us from a distance, still laughing softly. But now, its laughter had a tone of respect. It wasn't mocking us anymore. It was acknowledging us, as if to say, "You tried, you fought, but you can't win against me." And then, without warning, it turned and walked away, slowly at first, then faster as it disappeared into the shadows of the trees. We didn't move for a while, unsure of what had just happened. The silence that followed was deafening. Eventually, we made our way back to our ship, exhausted, confused, and shaken. The mission had failed, but it wasn't because we were outmatched. No, we had learned something that day. The creature wasn't some mindless monster. It wasn't trying to destroy us, and it wasn't afraid of us. It was something else entirely, something that, for reasons we would never fully understand, chose to let us go. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. It was a reminder that sometimes there are things in the universe that can't be explained, and perhaps they aren't meant to be. We shot it, we fought it, but in the end, it was still out there, and it was laughing. It started as a routine mission. A small colony on the edge of human space had gone dark, and our team was sent to investigate. We expected to find a simple communication failure, maybe some minor technical issues. What we found instead was something none of us were prepared for. The colony was empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just silence. The buildings were intact, personal belongings left behind as if everyone had simply walked away. It was eerie, like stepping into a ghost town. The air was thick with tension as we moved through the settlement, checking for any clues. Then we saw him. A lone man stood in the middle of the main street. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and completely still. His clothes were torn, his skin pale, but his eyes were wrong. They were too bright, almost glowing in the dim light. He stared at us, unblinking. Sergeant Davis raised his rifle. "Identify yourself," he ordered. No response. The man took a step forward. Davis repeated the command, his voice harder this time. Still, the man kept walking. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, smooth but deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. "Stop, or we will fire." The man smiled. Davis fired first, a clean shot to the chest. The impact rocked the man backward, but he didn't fall. Instead, he let out a low chuckle, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. He looked down at the wound, as if amused, and then kept coming. The rest of us opened fire, shot after shot. We hit him center mass, limbs, even a headshot, but it was like he didn't care. Blood ran from his wounds, but he never slowed down. He just kept laughing, a deep, unsettling sound that echoed through the empty colony. "Fall back," I shouted. We retreated into the nearest building, barricading the door behind us. Through the cracks, we could see him standing outside, watching us. The grin never left his face. He pressed his hands against the door, fingers digging into the metal like it was soft clay. "This isn't possible," Carter whispered. "What the hell is he?" No one had an answer. We needed a new plan. Our bullets weren't stopping him, but maybe fire would. We rigged up an improvised incendiary and hurled it through a gap in the door. The explosion lit up the street, flames roaring around him. For a moment, we thought we had won. The fire should have consumed him, reduced him to ash, but as the flames died down, he was still standing. His clothes were burned away, his skin blackened, but his grin was wider than ever. Then he spoke. "You can't kill what was never meant to die." His voice was calm, almost amused. Panic set in. If bullets and fire couldn't stop him, what could? Then I noticed something. His wounds were still open. He wasn't healing. He was resisting pain, but he wasn't invincible. "We don't need to kill him," I said. "We just need to slow him down." We lured him into a trap, using the colony's equipment. We rigged the power grid to overload, sending thousands of volts into his body. The moment he stepped into the charge zone, we activated it. Lightning arced through him. He convulsed, the laughter turning into a distorted, strangled noise. His body spasmed, his glowing eyes flickering like dying embers. And then he fell. We waited, guns ready, but he didn't get up. The light in his eyes was gone. It was over. We sealed the colony and called for extraction. We still didn't know what he was, where he came from, or what had happened to the settlers. But one thing was certain: wasn't human, not anymore. And whatever made him that way, we prayed it never happened again. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the smell of gunpowder hanging heavy as our squad braced for the worst. We had been stationed at Outpost Delta for 3 weeks, patrolling the border of what used to be safe territory. Now, it was nothing but a battleground. The enemy had been pushing hard, their numbers growing by the day. We didn't know where they were coming from, only that they never seemed to stop. That night, the alarm blared through the compound. I grabbed my rifle, heart pounding. As the floodlights clicked on, shadows stretched across the barren field beyond the walls. Moving fast, we took our positions, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Then we saw him. A lone figure, stepping into the light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in tattered combat gear that didn't match any uniform we'd seen before. His face was scarred, his eyes dark and unreadable. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, steady, unshaken, as if none of this mattered to him. "Identify yourself," Sergeant Davis called out, his voice firm. The figure didn't respond. He just kept walking, slow and deliberate. "Stop right there, or we'll open fire." Still no response. Davis gave the order. The first shot rang out, hitting the man square in the chest. He barely flinched. A second shot followed, then a third. Nothing. I saw it with my own eyes was hit, but it didn't go down. Instead, he grinned. A low chuckle rumbled from his throat, and then he started moving faster. We unloaded everything we had. Bullets tore through the air, striking him over and over, but it was like shooting at a ghost. He didn't fall. He didn't even slow down. "Fall back," someone shouted. We retreated behind the barricades, slamming the gate shut. I could still hear him laughing, that deep, unsettling sound echoing in the night. "What the hell is he?" Private Alvarez muttered, his hands shaking. "No idea," I said, trying to steady my breathing, "but he's not human." We watched as he reached the gate and placed one hand against the steel, and, with a strength that shouldn't have been possible, he pushed. The metal groaned, bending like it was made of tin. "This isn't happening," someone whispered. We had no choice. We had to run, scrambling through the compound. We made for the armory, searching for anything that could stop him. Explosives, high-powered rounds, anything. The gate finally gave way with a deafening crash. Heavy footsteps echoed through the compound as he walked in, unhurried, unstoppable. Fire in the hole. A grenade sailed through the air, landing right at his feet. The explosion tore through the space, sending debris flying. For a brief moment, there was silence. And, from the smoke, he emerged. His clothes were shredded, his skin charred in places, but he was still standing, still smiling. I felt a cold chill run through me. This was impossible. No one could survive that. And something changed. He stopped. His grin faded, and for the first time, his expression shifted confusion, maybe even surprise. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers like he was seeing them for the first time. And he turned his gaze toward us. "You're different," he said, his voice deep and rough, like he hadn't spoken in years. Not like the others. We didn't know what he meant. We didn't move, didn't breathe. For the first time, he hesitated. And, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. No one spoke for a long time. We just stood there, our weapons still raised, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading. Davis was the first to break the silence. "What the hell was that?" No one had an answer. All we knew was that he could have killed us, but he didn't. Something stopped him. Something changed. Maybe he wasn't as unstoppable as he seemed. Maybe, just maybe, he had a weakness after all. We never saw him again, but from that night on, we knew the truth. There were things out there beyond our understanding. Things that walked among us, immune to our weapons, laughing in the face of death. The first shot should have put him down. It was a direct hit, center mass. Any other creature would have crumpled to the ground, gasping for its final breath. But the human, he just staggered, looked down at the wound, and laughed. I was there. I saw it happen. My squad mates were just as stunned as I was. We had fought many species before, tall ones, short ones, some with armor, some with skills, but never had we encountered something like this. The stories we heard about humans were exaggerated. We thought, tales told to scare rookies. But standing there, watching this wounded human straighten his back and charge forward, I realized the stories had not gone far enough. "Hit him again," our commander barked, snapping us out of our shock. Another shot rang out. This time, it caught him in the shoulder. He stumbled, but did not stop. Blood poured from the wound, soaking his strange, primitive armor. Yet his eyes never lost focus. He moved with purpose, determination, like something deep inside him refused to let him fall. "Impossible," one of my squad mates muttered. "Nothing should be able to take that." The human grinned, his teeth bared in a display we couldn't quite understand. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something else, something unsettling. We fired again, another hit, and another. The human should have collapsed. He should have been dead, but he wasn't. He reached our line before we even realized how close he had gotten. With a movement so fast it was a blur, he struck the first soldier. Bones cracked. The impact sent my squadmate flying. Another soldier lunged at him, but the human twisted, avoiding the strike, and delivered a blow to the attacker's side. The sound of breaking ribs filled the air. Panic set in. We had never faced anything like this. Even the strongest creatures we had fought before had limits. They could be taken down. They had a point where they would stop. But the human, there was no hesitation, no surrender, just relentless motion. For a moment, I locked eyes with him. His gaze burned with something I didn't recognize. It wasn't just survival. It wasn't just the instinct to fight. It was something deeper, something primal. My commander shouted for retreat. Some soldiers scrambled back, but I couldn't move. I needed to understand. I needed to know how a being so fragile-looking could be so unstoppable. The human finally slowed, his breath heavy, his body was failing. I could see it in the way his legs trembled slightly, the way he favored his uninjured side. He had to be in unbearable pain, yet he was still standing. Then he did something I never expected. He spoke. "You think a few holes are gonna stop me?" he said, his voice rough but steady. We all knew the universal language, but hearing it from his mouth, in his own strange accent, sent chills through me. He staggered, finally sinking to one knee, yet even then, there was no fear in his expression, only defiance. "What are you?" I asked before I could stop myself. He gave me that grin again, full of something I still couldn't quite understand. "A soldier," he said, "same as you." A soldier. No, he was something else entirely. Our species fought for territory, for dominance, but this human fought for something else, something that burned inside him so fiercely that even pain and death could not put it out. We could have finished him right then. We had the numbers, and he was too weak to resist anymore, but something inside me refused. I looked at my commander, who met my gaze, and I could see he was thinking the same thing. We holstered our weapons. The fight was over. The human exhaled heavily and fell back, finally succumbing to his wounds. But even as he collapsed, he was smiling. We treated his injuries, though we knew he didn't expect us to. His people would have done the same for one of their own. And at that moment, we understood. Humans were not just another species, they were something different, something terrifying, something admirable. When he woke up, he looked at us, surprised. "Didn't think you'd keep me alive?" he said with a weak chuckle. I only nodded. There was no need for words. From that day forward, I knew the stories about humans were true. They were relentless, unyielding, and if we ever faced them again, I only hoped we would be on the same side. Because if we weren't, we would never stand a chance. It started as a routine patrol. We were deep in the outer colonies, a small squad of 6, clearing out an abandoned research station. At least, that's what command told us it was. The place was too quiet, too empty. Something felt wrong the moment we stepped inside. "Stay sharp," Sergeant Lewis muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His grip on his rifle tightened as we moved down the long, dimly lit corridor. Dust floated in the beams of our helmet lights, and the faint hum of emergency power was the only sound. Then we saw him. At first, I thought it was just another corpse, another casualty of the war between humanity and the unknown horrors that lurked in deep space. But then he moved. Slow at first, like waking from a long sleep. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his frame. His eyes black as the void, locked onto us. "Identify yourself," Lewis ordered. No response. The figure just stood there, head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. Private Mills raised his rifle. To her, "I don't like this." None of us did. The figure took a step forward, then another. That's far enough, Lewis warned. Still, the men kept coming, slow and deliberate. Take him down, Lewis ordered. Mills fired first, a single round to the chest. The force should have knocked him back, should have dropped him. Instead, the man barely flinched. He looked down at the hole in his chest, then back at us, and he left. A deep, chilling sound that didn't belong in a human throat. We opened fire. Bullets tore into him, ripping through flesh and bone. Blood sprayed the walls, pooling at his feet. But it didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He just kept coming, his grin stretching wider, unnatural, monstrous. Fall back, Lewis shouted. We ran, backing down the corridor, still firing, but nothing worked. Shot after shot, he just kept moving, that awful laughter echoing through the station. He's not human, Private Davis screamed, panic setting in. Shut up and keep firing, Lewis barked. We reached a bulkhead and slammed the emergency lock. A second later, he was there, pounding on the metal door. Dent started forming. He was strong to strong. We need to get out of here, I gasped, my heart hammering in my chest. The hangar, Lewis said. If we can make it there, we can blow the station behind us. The pounding grew louder. We didn't wait, sprinting to the station. We didn't dare look back. We could still hear him. The slow, steady footsteps, the laughter. We reached the hangar, sealing the doors behind us. Our shuttle was still there, engines cold. I ran to the control panel, fingers flying over the launch sequence. Come on, I muttered. The door behind us shook, then it burst open. It was there. Lewis fired his grenade launcher. The explosion sent fire and debris in all directions. For a second, silence. Then, from the flames, he stepped forward. His body was charred, pieces missing, but it didn't stop. Get on the ship, Lewis ordered. We scrambled inside. The doors sealed. The engines roared to life. Through the viewport, we saw him standing there, watching us, smiling. I punched the detonation code. The charges we'd placed throughout the station activated. As we shot into space, the station erupted in a fireball, the shockwave rocking our shuttle. For a moment, we sat in stunned silence. Then Nils spoke, voice shaking. Do you think he's dead? No one answered, because none of us believed it. We shot him, but it just laughed and kept coming. And somehow, we knew this wasn't over. The air was thick with tension as Sergeant Vec craned his neck, scanning the ruined street ahead. The war had raged for months now, and despite their superior technology and numbers, the humans refused to break. Their resilience was maddening. Their will to fight, unshakable. And now, here he was, on the front lines, staring down one of their most feared warriors. The human stood alone in the middle of the rubble-strewn road, his armor scratched and dented but still holding. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, but his eyes burnt with an intensity that sent a chill down Vec's spine. This was no ordinary soldier. He was a monster in human form. Vec raised his plasma rifle, signaling his squad to prepare for an attack. We end this now, he growled. The others nodded, their weapons humming to life. They had faced humans before, but this one was different. This one had wiped out an entire platoon just hours ago. A sharp command rang through their comms, and they opened fire. Plasma rounds tore through the air, striking the human dead center. The impact should have vaporized him, but instead, he staggered slightly and let out a deep, guttural laugh. The sound sent a wave of unease through the squad. Again, Vec ordered, his voice tinged with frustration. More plasma fire rained down, striking the human repeatedly. His armor sizzled, his skin burned, but he did not fall. He did not scream. He did not stop. Instead, he smiled. That all you got? The human growled, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off nothing more than an inconvenience. Vec's heart pounded. This wasn't possible. Their weapons could tear through steel, yet this human stood as if their attacks were mere insect bites. The squad exchanged nervous glances. The human took a step forward, then another, and another. His boots crunched over shattered debris as he advanced without fear. Fall back, one of the soldiers cried, panic creeping into his voice. But it was too late. The human lunged forward with terrifying speed, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. He grabbed the nearest soldier by the throat and lifted him effortlessly. his fingers tightening until the alien's helmet cracked like fragile glass. With a sickening crunch, he tossed the lifeless body aside and turned to the others. Vec fired point blank, desperation taking over. The plasma rounds burned against the human's chest, but they might as well have been raindrops against a mountain. The human struck like lightning, a fist slamming into another soldier, sending him flying through a crumbling wall. A quick, brutal kick sent another soldier sprawling, his armor crushed in an instant. The remaining members of the squad scrambled to retreat, but the human was relentless. He weaved through them with frightening ease, his every move precise, efficient, and devastating. One by one, they fell, until only Vec remained. He stumbled backward, his rifle slipping from his grasp. He had fought for years, faced countless enemies, but nothing had prepared him for this. He had thought humans were weak, fragile. How wrong he had been. The human stopped just a few feet away, staring at Vec with an expression that was almost amused. "You're lucky," he said, his voice rough but calm. "I'm in a good mood today." Vec didn't understand. The human could have killed him, but he didn't. Instead, he turned and walked away, his battered form disappearing into the smoke and dust of the battlefield. Vec collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. His squad was gone, his weapons useless, and yet he was still alive. He had witnessed something beyond his comprehension of force of nature disguised as a man. He had fought a human, and the human had won. We were deep in enemy territory, an alien world covered in thick, blue-tinted fog. The ground was rough, uneven, and smelled like rotting metal. Our squad had been sent in to secure a perimeter and eliminate any threats. We weren't expecting much resistance until we met him. He was human, like us, but something was wrong. His eyes were wild, burning with something beyond fear or rage. His uniform was tattered, but you could still make out the insignia. He had been one of ours, part of an earlier squad that never reported back. When he appeared from the mist, we gave the standard warnings. "Identify yourself," our sergeant barked. He didn't respond. He just stood there, staring. His breathing was heavy, like he had been running for hours. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. There was something in his stance as something that made my stomach twist. Then he charged. The first shot hit him square in the chest. He didn't flinch, I swear. He didn't even blink. He just kept coming. We hesitated. It didn't make sense. A direct hit from a high-powered rifle should have at least slowed him down. But he didn't stumble, didn't even acknowledge the impact. Just that same crazed, relentless look in his eyes. "Take him down," the sergeant shouted. We fired in unison, a rain of bullets tearing into him. His body jerked with the force of the impacts, but it never stopped. Not once. Blood seeped through his uniform, but he didn't collapse. His laugh ate a deep, guttural sound that sent chills through every one of us. That was when panic set in. A few of the guys backed away, their weapons shaking in their hands. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. It wasn't right. Nothing about this was right. Then, without warning, he lunged. He moved faster than he should have been able to, closing the distance in seconds. He grabbed one of our men by the throat and lifted him like he weighed nothing. We kept firing, but it didn't matter. He tossed our teammate aside like a rag doll and turned to the rest of us. "Stop," the sergeant yelled. "Who are you?" For the first time, he responded. His voice was hoarse, barely human. "We don't die," he whispered. I felt my blood turn cold. He kept moving forward, one slow step at a time. Our weapons were useless. I had no idea what we were up against. Then, a thought struck me. Maybe bullets weren't the answer. Maybe there was something else keeping him alive. I reached for my pack, fingers fumbling for the emergency incendiary grenade. If bullets couldn't stop him, maybe fire could. I pulled the pin and threw it at his feet. The explosion rocked the ground, sending flames roaring into the air. The heat was unbearable, even from where we stood. The smoke was thick, choking. For the first time, he let out a sound of pain. He staggered. His laugh turned into a ragged, agonized scream. His body convulsed, and for a second, I thought he was going to charge again. But then, slowly, he fell to his knees. The fire consumed him, and as it burned, his form seemed to shift. For a brief moment, It wasn't human at all, something dark, something twisted beneath his skin, writhed and howled, and then, just like that, it was gone. We stood in stunned silence, the only sound the crackling flames. The sergeant let out a shaky breath. What the hell was that? No one had an answer. We never spoke about it again. When we reported back, we said we encountered heavy resistance and neutralized an unknown enemy. We never mentioned the man who wouldn't die. We never mentioned his laughter. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I still hear it. And I wonder if he was the only one.